The component of this involving South Carolina was called Operation Border War, which is an investigation of behavioral health providers, approximately 50 companies based in or near Charlotte, North Carolina, who systematically defrauded the Medicaid program of South Carolina of over $21 million. Let me say that again. Defrauded South Carolina's Medicaid program with over $21 million between the years of 2017 and 2024. This investigation was titled Operation Border War because the defendants took advantage of a rule that the South Carolina Department of Health and Human Services had in place, which allows Medicaid providers to enroll companies located within 25 miles of South Carolina. So obviously that would bleed over into North Carolina. And they took advantage of that 25-mile exemption to be able to help create this fraudulent scheme. In 2020, members of my Vulnerable Adults and Medicaid Provider Fraud Unit worked with the South Carolina Department of Health and Human Services to begin to identify the targets and the companies and the scheme being implemented that plagued South Carolina's Medicaid program. Particularly, this was built around behavioral health programs that exploited our citizens for years. We then, after understanding the cross-border nature of this, started partnering with the U.S. Attorney's Office, the FBI, and our other federal partners who are standing up here with us today. This is an example of our office's ability to go after tens of millions of dollars that were being defrauded against South Carolina beneficiaries. And just to give you a little bit of what was going on, what 8 co-conspirators basically would do is that they would go and they would create fictitious companies or straw companies. They would go to the Secretary of State's office. They would incorporate. You heard some of the names that Agent Barnacle just talked about. But they would just create a company. And then they would go and they would find legitimate, actual, real licensed professional counselors. And they would meet with those licensed professional counselors and say, hey, we have a company, Helping Hands, or whatever the name of it was. We would like for you to come provide services to Medicaid beneficiaries, fill out this application. From that application, they would be able to get a lot of the personal identifiable information of these LPCs or licensed professional counselors. They already had their national provider ID number, and they would use that information. Once they met with the licensed professional counselor, they would then enroll them up into the company and then apply through the South Carolina Medicaid program, giving that straw company the imprimatur of being an official mental health service provider. Most of the LPCs, or licensed professional counselors, were duped. They were unknowing. There were a couple who actually were complicit in this scheme, but the vast majority of them did not know this. Then, once they had the company set up, and once they had stolen the information from the counselors, the Medicaid providers, and had them into the company and enrolled in the program, they would then start filing fraudulent claims against Medicaid beneficiaries in South Carolina. Now, what's interesting about these Medicaid beneficiaries is that the majority, nearly all of these were severely disabled children, children who were quadriplegic or nonverbal or autistic or had some other mental health issue that was significant or severe. And they would start billing for services that these minor, severely disabled children never received. And that was basically the scheme that was rolled up, and that is what they did. They would even, and this is really was insidious, they would diagnose these children, okay, and then put notes into their file that they were filing against. Like, for instance, by way of example, on a child who was a quadriplegic, they were saying this child was being disruptive and running around the classroom or yelling things when the child was nonverbal, and diagnosing them and putting these notes into their official files and then filing those, basically violating those children's and those families' privacy. In addition to the scheme, they were able to get, some of these co-conspirators were able to get access to the Medicaid beneficiaries, the children's information, legally because of where they had formerly worked. We had one of the co-conspirators was a former professor of social work at the University of South Carolina at Limestone, I believe. And then another former employee was worked for a case management company, and another one worked for the South Carolina Department of Juvenile Justice. So they would obtain the Medicaid provider's information in a physical meeting, and then they would get the beneficiaries' information through legal means that these co-conspirators had access to. Whenever they would, whenever one of these fake companies that was fraudulent billing against the Medicaid system in South Carolina would get flagged for excessive or abusive billing practices, they would then rinse and repeat this entire scheme again. They would create another company. They would go find new beneficiaries, or they would go find new counselors, or just transfer the counselors over to the new company, and then they would replicate that scheme all over again. That's why you have such a large number. And they were billing on behalf of these children and misdiagnosing them, which to me was just a horrible thing for them to do. Now, one of the law enforcement techniques that was implemented by members of our team, which I thought was ingenious, is that they created a bunch of fake beneficiary accounts. And working with our federal partners and our friends up here in the Charlotte area, we basically populated the scheme using confidential informants to populate these fake beneficiary numbers, and that way we were able to follow the fraud, because whenever that beneficiary claim would be filed, we knew that was a fake kid. That beneficiary did not actually exist. So it was really kind of ingenious. What I want to say, and I'm going to recognize some of the members of our team here in just a second, but what I want the people who are perpetrating this to know, allegedly perpetrating this to know, and what I want anyone else out there doing this to know, is that if you commit this kind of conduct, you're potentially destroying lives, and as was said just a moment ago, you're diverting incredibly important resources away from the people who need it the most, and you're basically punishing the taxpayer, and you're punishing the families, and you're punishing these children, and that is something we can't abide. So we are going to come after you, and we are going to find you, just as the U.S. Attorney said, and you will be prosecuted. And I also want to say this: everyone in this case right now, these are all allegations at this point, and everyone is presumed innocent unless proven guilty in a court of law. And they should enjoy that presumption of innocence. But for those out there who are conducting these types of alleged conduct, we will find you and we will get you. I want to thank the Vulnerable Adult Medicaid Provider Fraud Unit folks that are with me today. We had a lot of people, and I'm not going to read every name, but I do want to call out Jamie Seals, who was our lead investigator sitting up here on the front row, who literally lived in this case for the last 4 or 5 years. I also want to thank Senior Assistant Deputy Attorney General Stephanie Opit and Chief Investigator John Frampton for their contributions. We also had Chief Auditor Lisa Collins, Assistant Attorney General Emily Claybar, who were assisting. And I could start going down the list of everyone in our office, but it is the men and women in the Attorney General's office working with the men and women of the FBI, HSI, OIG, the U.S. Attorney's Office, the Attorney General's office here in North Carolina, and other partners, that if it wasn't us working together collaboratively, that we would not have been able to bust open this scheme and hold these individuals accountable. So it was an honor for me to be here today. Again, if you continue to abuse mentally disabled children by defrauding the Medicaid system, you are going down. Thank you very much. Mr. U.S. Attorney.